So I'm Guillaume, I work at 3Scale, an API management company, more than 250 customers using our solution, but that's not the purpose of my talk, so let's dive right away into the topic. So welcome to the API economy. I guess everyone has heard of this concept quite often recently. It's a new, trendy concept when talking about APIs. And the purpose of my talk today is going to try to identify what are the key components or items that you have to explore when you want to, or when you're thinking about an API for your business. Okay, but let's start with the beginning. APIs are everywhere, reshaping the web. I think we all pretty much agree on that. Mobile. Flurry was tracking more than 1 trillion events a few months ago, in-app events, all calling an API somewhere on some backend. Close to 9 billion devices in the Internet of Things space, more than 600 million websites, and a third chunk of all those elements are using APIs, obviously. And APIs are not only reshaping the web, but they're also reshaping businesses. They're everywhere in every sector. Media, social media, e-commerce, finance, nutrition, banking, government, charities, retail, everywhere. Nobody can't afford or can't avoid having an API today. Programmable web, I guess everybody knows this very famous directory of APIs. 10,000 listed as of today, more or less. Sorry about the iceberg, I couldn't avoid it. If you consider the growth rate of programmable web listing and you assume that there's 5 to 10 times more APIs out there than the one listed on programmable web, and you forecast that or project that over the next 4 years, that means 1 million API out there. Okay, and in the very worst case scenario, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of API out there. But how did we get there? So let's roll back in time a little bit. Do you know this guy? It's pretty famous. Mark Andreessen, founder of Netscape. In 2011, he made a statement, pretty bold and famous: software is eating the world. Why that? Software is eating the world because it has become the lifeblood of modern businesses. Automating, improving, optimizing processes, transactions, distributions, making formerly slow processes real-time. However, because a software harness offers new possibilities, if you want to make sure that those new possibilities are 100% harnessed, you need to make sure that the features and functionalities of that software are available to the third parties that need it, that need access to it. Okay? There come the APIs. Laura Merling, currently VP Ecosystem and Solutions at AT&T, pretty famous in the API space. In 2011, same year as Mark Andreessen's statement, said APIs are the building blocks of the digital economy. They are the building blocks of your digital strategy, and they are the building blocks of your software. At 3Scale, we even push the concept further. We think that APIs are eating software. Why? Well, when you think about your digital strategy, you will want to put in place something that is future-proof in terms of investment. You will want something that is cost-effective, flexible, accessible, that can evolve with your business. And you want something that gives you close to real-time or real-time access to your resources. APIs are the glue layer to access those common resources within a company. Therefore, this statement from Stephen Wilmot, the CEO of 3Scale. So the need to control and unify interfaces to your business is a strong driver for API adoption, for API implementation within a company and for API exposure. Another very wise guy, Dion Hinchcliffe, don't know if you know him. He's a consultant, blogger, tech analyst, pretty famous. Made a statement. I've adjusted it a little bit, or shortened it a little bit. APIs will be essential for competitive survival. Actually, the complete statement is, we are nearing the time when opening our supply chains across the web isn't just a good idea. It will be essential for competitive survival. That was in 2008, 5 years ago. And I think that it is more than ever valid and true today. So we're getting towards an API-driven business. You have your digital strategy. You have your software that is driving your digital strategy. You have your APIs that are the core glue layer to access this software. Is going to become a competitive survival need. We're heading towards an API-driven business. However, this is where comes the trouble. Many companies think about an API as something brand new, something that needs to be spun off their core business. We need to have an API program, no matter what. But the question is, what API? What API am I going to put in place? What business model am I going to put on top of that API? When actually, the question is totally different. From a company perspective, from a business perspective, what is your core value, or what is core to the value your business generates? Is your core assets, your key differentiation factor, the things that you excel at, where you're an expert at, okay? The API is just a channel into those things that you already do perfectly and very well. So the question is not, what business model am I going to use for my API, or am I going to apply to my API that I've pulled out of nowhere? The question is, what API for my business model? Which API is going to best channel value into my company, leveraging my core assets or my core asset? Okay, so that's the core, and I think a critical question that you have to ask yourself. That doesn't mean that an API cannot generate a totally new business opportunity. Actually, it is the case in lots of companies. But the starting point should really be for you guys, what is the core asset we have at company XYZ, and how can we maximize value or get more value from that asset? APIs are pretty powerful and can drive success in many ways. I believe that there are 5 main use cases that we can identify. The first one is mobile enablement. I don't think that there's that many apps on your mobile phone that are standalone apps that don't communicate with the backend somewhere on the internet. That is not true today. So if you want to go mobile, if you want to get rid of this diversity and complexity of devices, of OS for the different mobile phones, you're going to have to have an API to make that easier for you to go mobile. The second use case is customer and partner ecosystem growth. Okay, you want more customers to use your product. You want more partners to resell your product. That is a way to accelerate this growth in a very streamlined way, in a very cost-effective way, in a very easy way for third parties to access, again, your assets and do something about it, do something with it. The third component is a digital distribution channel. So think about it as, for example, e-commerce. transactions. You want to be able to have your catalog available anywhere else, so you can have more and more buyers every day purchasing your goods or your items on your e-commerce platform. You eventually want to create or to offer the opportunity to third parties to create niche e-commerce sites where people that are, I don't know, Manchester Football Club fans will be available when they go to blog XYZ about Manchester Football Club, be able to buy and purchase only the items that are available on your website related to the Manchester Football Club, for example. The fourth item is powering new business models. I've just mentioned it. So think about Twilio, pretty famous example. Music Match, I don't know if you've heard of this company, Italian company, which basically makes available more than 5 million lyrics through an API in a totally legal way. The API is their product and everything goes through their API, and their entire business model is relying on their API. And finally, internal efficiency and innovation. So that points back to the item I was mentioning a little bit earlier, that is, you want to have future-proof investment in infrastructure and software when it comes to digital strategy and accessing real-time elements and making sure that this is cost-effective and agile. So that gives you a picture of why APIs, how we got there, why they're important, and what you should, or what angle you should have when you talk about an API and consider having an API within your company. And to go further into that, I would like to highlight a few key consideration items to have in mind when preparing your API strategy. So the first element is the organization's core asset. I've already mentioned it. You should really ask yourself, what is our core asset? What is our core capability? What are we best at? And how can we maximize profits, revenues, business leveraging this core asset? So everybody knows, I hope, or a lot of people know the MVC framework, mobile view component. It's pretty famous. Model, data, it's your content. The view is a presentation layer, and the controller is a logic, the algorithm, whatever processing solution you've put in place. And so if you take the example of Twitter, which at least was true in the early days of Twitter, maybe not now, their core asset was the model, the data, the content, all those tweets all over the place, all the people tweeting every day. And so the best way for them to leverage that and create more business was to go into the view space without having to do it themselves. And so they made available their data, their content through an API so that third parties could create the view component, the presentation layer, and therefore get in as many places as possible and gets distributed in as many places as possible. Today, it's not necessarily true, but it was at least still a few years ago. And so just to give you a few examples of business strategies that highlight the three different categories, presentation, logic, and data. So Netflix's mission is revolutionize the way people watch movie, okay? And their core asset is the data and the content. And the best way to fulfill their mission is to make sure that their content is available on as many devices in as many presentation layers as possible. Twilio, their mission is simplify the world of telecom by providing simple, powerful, pay-as-you-go infrastructure as a service. Their core asset is a controller. It's the logic. It's the infrastructure that enables all those calls, all those SMS transactions. And the best way to be successful for them business-wise was not to create specific apps on top of that and start selling those apps, but on the contrary, make their infrastructure, their technology, their controller directly accessible through an API. And the third example, which is in phone chips, their mission has changed 2 years ago, but when they started, their mission was increase the world's access to data especially free and open data. So they were in Phoneships, for those who don't know who they are, was a kind of marketplace for data, sets, CSV file, anything you could find on the web, data related, and reselling that. So their core asset was the data, the content, and the best way for them to make a profit out of that, to make a business out of that, was giving access directly to this data through their API, but also through have an API so that people can push data into their marketplace, because they needed to have this marketplace to grow so that they could become the leader in the space, which unfortunately didn't happen, at least for that business ID that they had in mind. Now it's become something different. But that was their objective. Become the leading marketplace for open source, open data. And so having an API to fit into their database was the best way for them. So again, when you come to an API, identify what is your core asset, choose a complementary asset which will bring or deliver most value, and finally define a strategy that will capture most value out of this. Another element to take into consideration is the degree of openness of your API. Is it going to be just for internal reuse purposes? Is it going to be only for customer reuse? Or are you going to make it available to partners, third-party companies that will create new technologies, new applications, leveraging your assets through your API? Or are you going to make it open to anybody and just see how it goes and where it goes and if you're successful? Or are you going to do all of that? You have to think about it. You have to think, who will serve best your API? And so that's your target audience. That's classical or basic strategic analysis framework. Who's my target audience? What are the distribution channels? All those kind of things. And that applies for API exactly the same way. The revenue model is a third element of consideration. Maybe you've seen this graph. It's John Musser, the founder of Programmable Web, who made it. I think there is actually a more recent version with even more boxes all over the place. The thing that is important here is APIs are so flexible, are so powerful that they enable you to create almost any business model, any revenue model you would like. Whether it's going to be a direct revenue model, whether it's going to be an indirect one, whether it's going to be a cost-saving solution for you, I would say that the only limit is your imagination and the way you will want to suit your customers' needs or your partners' needs or your internal needs, and also what type of creativity and imagination you have when it comes to those reflections. Finally, the delivery of the API is also another key item. So we've been talking a lot during those 2 days about security around APIs, about UX and UI around APIs, access control. All those components, all those questions are extremely important and extremely relevant when it comes down to an API. And as Andreas yesterday was mentioning in his closing presentation, it's not just for IT. It's IT, DevOps, and business people that have to have a stake into that thinking, into that reflection process, so that you build something that is valuable and is going to bring long-term value to your business. It's not just about which open source system or which infrastructure I'm going to use to solve that technical problem. So you have to have everyone on board. Some people will say that those elements are crystallized into an API management solution. That is true, but it goes beyond that. You need, again, to mention Andreas' talk yesterday, you need to have a marketing team that is going to market your API. Whether developers like it or not, you need to know who they are, what they like, what they want. You need a support team, because you're going to have calls of people complaining about your UX that is very bad, about a request that doesn't work, or an error message that doesn't match the answer from your API. So you really need to have a full company onboarding when it comes to an API project. So having gone through all those key considerations when it comes to an API strategy, I would like to walk you through what we think at Trayscale are the different API typologies you will find out there. It's not necessarily exhaustive. I don't think it is, actually. I think there are pretty much quite many other options. But I think it reflects at least more than 75, 80% of the type of APIs that are here today. So the first case is the API is a product. So that's a case of Twilio. That's a case of Amazon Web Services. You provide access directly into your infrastructure, into your core asset through an API, and what you market, what you sell is primarily the API. So the API is a product. That's the first type of API. The second one is the API projects the product. So this is the example of Salesforce. The third one is, I'll go into more details about each of them in a second. The third one is the API promotes the product. So Amazon is a very good example, and we'll see why. And finally, the API powers and feeds your product. That the perfect use case would be Twitter. So talking about the API as a product, API is core value to your business, okay? Actually, what is core value is your infrastructure, is your capability to enable calls, SMS, but from a business point of view, the core value is the API because this is what you're going to sell. So that's Twilio. And Twilio makes money in that configuration if the core service sees a usage growth, because they have a direct revenue model that is basically charging people on the number of events or the length of events that they generate through the API. There's a specific ecosystem strategy, and there are other examples of APIs doing the same. So Music Match, I've mentioned it, Skype, Stripe, Amazon. The APIs projects a product. So we've got Salesforce. Salesforce, their core platform is CRM, but they project their products with their API so that they can enable mobile application, they can enable a partner ecosystem that are going to feed and add value to the core platform, to the core business. And this is how they will be growing through an increasing customer spend, primary, and the number of customers for the core product. There's a specific ecosystem strategy to that. A lot of other examples. I'm sorry, I'm accelerating the speed because I only have 2 minutes left. The third one is the API promotes a product. So Yellow Pages model, typical one. The product is a directory of businesses, of shops, whatever. And the best way to have more and more shops and businesses getting listed on that directory is by having people using that directory. And so to have more people using that directory, you want to promote it in as many places as possible. So that's going to be the way your API is working out. And finally, the power and fits the product typology, which is a Twitter case. It's based on the user-generated content aspect of those platforms, which brings value to your core product. And other examples in that space are Discuss, Foursquare, pretty famous ones. So summarizing and going to conclusions, we have done some survey at Trayscale about what would be or what does the split look like between those 4 different typologies. And as you can see, it's pretty evenly spread across the types. There is no predominant one, and actually there's a lot of other options that are there. Government, nonprofit, scientific cases are totally different types of APIs, even though you can relate somehow to the formulas I've just mentioned. So again, just to conclude, and I'm going to hammer you with that, but I think it's important. It's your organization core asset that is valuable, and not the API itself. The API is just a channel into that. So ask yourself what API is good for your business model and not the reverse. You need to have technological and business considerations and people involved in the process. And obviously you need a management buy-in because it's a long-term commitment. It's like a wedding, as Andreas was describing it yesterday. And you can't afford, for the sake of your business, for the branding you have, to deploy an API program that within X months or years is going to be shut down because it didn't meet the success that you were expecting. Thank you, guys.